What do you do when your family demands something you can never give back? When they ask for your kidney, not just as a life-saving procedure, but as a test of love and loyalty? This is the story of how I faced the unthinkable. My father's need for a transplant and my refusal to donate. The decision I made would tear apart my family, and I was left wondering, was it selfish to protect myself, or was it the only choice I could live with? Stay tuned to hear how this impossible decision unraveled everything. You're watching VowsBurn, where we explore the toughest, most emotional stories about family, betrayal, and the consequences of life-changing choices. It's funny how a single moment can change everything. I always thought I knew what family meant. You do anything for them, don't you? Blood is thicker than water, they say. But that belief was about to be tested in a way I never imagined. A way that would rip apart everything I thought was true about loyalty, obligation, and the sacrifices we make for those we love. It started one quiet evening, just like any other. My parents, Dad and Mom, and I were sitting around the dinner table, having our usual conversation of passing pleasantries and day-to-day life. But this time, things took a turn. My father, who'd always been a mountain of strength in my eyes, looked frail, thin even. I hadn't noticed it before, but now, as we sat across from each other, I realized just how much he'd changed in recent months. "Sweetheart," Mom said, breaking the silence, "we need to talk." I looked up, immediately sensing the shift in her tone. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of concern and desperation, that immediately unsettled me. "What's going on?" I asked, glancing between the two of them. Mom swallowed hard, as if the words she was about to speak had been choking her for days. "Your father needs a kidney transplant." The air in the room felt like it had thickened in an instant. I froze, trying to process what she was saying. I had heard about kidney disease, of course, but I hadn't realized it had progressed this far. Dad had always been a pillar of strength. He'd never shown signs of slowing down, of needing help. And now, here we were, talking about something so invasive, so life-altering. My gaze shifted to Dad, who had been silent up until now. He met my eyes briefly before looking down at his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. My stomach clenched. I'd never seen him look so vulnerable. "We've spoken to the doctors, sweetheart," Mom continued. "They say you're a match. We were hoping you could donate a kidney." I blinked, trying to process her words, but they didn't seem to make sense. I felt as though the room had gone silent, and I was trapped in my own head, unable to grasp the gravity of what had just been asked. My kidney. My body. A gift, but also a sacrifice. Could I do that for my father? Could I give away a part of myself, forever? The weight of it all crashed over me. I looked at Dad, the man who had always been there, the man who had raised me, who had made every decision for me and my future. And now I was being asked to make the ultimate sacrifice for him. But what was it worth? What was my life worth in comparison to his? Was I even allowed to say no? "No," I said before I even fully processed the decision. It was out before I could stop it. The word hung in the air, thick with emotion. I immediately regretted it, but the damage was done. The gut-wrenching internal conflict. The moment the word left my lips, I knew my world was about to shift. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Dad looked at me, his face crumpling with the kind of hurt I had never seen in his eyes. Mom's expression twisted, as if she had already anticipated this answer, but hoped with all her heart it wouldn't come. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she remained quiet, waiting for me to explain. I didn't know how to explain. What could I say? "Sorry, Dad, but I need my kidney more than you do." That sounded selfish, even in my mind. But as I sat there, a torrent of thoughts filled my head. This wasn't just about a kidney. This was about my autonomy, my future, my health. Could I truly make a decision that would impact the rest of my life, forever, just to keep the family intact? I felt a familiar pressure in my chest, the kind I got when I was faced with difficult decisions. I wanted to make everyone happy. I wanted to save Dad, but was I willing to sacrifice myself for his sake? The ethical dilemmas were suffocating. What did it mean to truly love someone? Was family love enough to justify the irreversible consequences of a life-altering decision? Dad didn't speak for a long while, but I could see the hurt in his eyes, the confusion, the pain. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was disbelief. And there, in the silence of that room, the truth started to sink in. "You can't be serious," Mom said, her voice shaking. She stood up, pacing in front of me. "You're the only match. You're his daughter, his only child. He needs you." I wanted to tell her that I needed myself too, that I needed to be selfish for once, to protect my own health. But how could I? How could I look her in the eye and say I wasn't willing to give a part of myself to save my father? The guilt was overwhelming, but beneath it all, I felt a fierce, rising sense of self-preservation. "I'm sorry, Mom," I repeated, my voice thick with the weight of it all. "I can't do it. I'm not ready to risk my health. I can't." The immediate fallout. The days that followed were filled with a storm of emotions. Anger, hurt, confusion. The silence between us was suffocating. Mom didn't speak to me much. When she did, it was cold, clipped. Dad, too, withdrew, retreating into a shell I had never seen before. I could feel the strain in every interaction, the subtle judgments lurking behind every glance. I had thought refusing would be the hardest part. I was wrong. The hardest part was living with the consequences of that refusal, the guilt, the isolation, the uncertainty of whether I had made the right choice. Our once vibrant family dinners were now quiet affairs. Conversations stopped short when I entered the room. Whispers followed me as I walked through the house. Extended family members began to ask questions that only added to my growing sense of being an outsider. I had become the villain in my own family's narrative. The whispers were the worst. The quiet judgment, the sideways glances. I could hear them talking about me, about my decision. The guilt gnawed at me constantly. I had chosen myself, and it felt wrong. But deep down, I knew there was no other way. It was my life, my future, and my choice. And I couldn't let anyone make that decision for me, not even my parents. In the weeks that followed, the silence in my house grew unbearable. Every day felt like a weight pressing on my chest, each glance from Mom and Dad a reminder of the choice I had made. I had never imagined that something so simple, a refusal to donate an organ, could tear apart the very fabric of our family. But now, I was facing the consequences of that decision, and the emotional toll was more than I had ever anticipated. I tried to convince myself I had made the right choice. My body, my decision. That's what I kept telling myself. But the guilt lingered, a constant shadow in the back of my mind. I hadn't just refused to give my father a kidney. I had refused a piece of myself, an act of loyalty, a gesture of family love. In my mind, I kept turning the words over and over. Selfish, protecting myself, losing him. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the silence around me deafening. I could hear the conversations I hadn't been a part of, the whispered judgments, the sideways glances when I entered the room. It wasn't just the emotional withdrawal from Dad and Mom that hurt. It was the slow realization that the family I had known was no longer the same. This choice had fractured something deep inside us all. The pressure mounts. The pressure didn't let up. Every time I saw Mom, her face was drawn, her eyes darkened with fatigue and worry. She still hadn't forgiven me. But worse than her anger was her quiet desperation, the way she subtly tried to convince me that I was wrong. The way she tried to manipulate me, just like when I was a child, was to make me feel guilty for not putting the family first. "Sweetheart," she would say, her voice soft but persistent. "You know your father needs this. It's not just about his health. It's about saving his life. You can't just turn your back on him." I heard the words over and over again in my head. You can't turn your back on him. He's your father. It was like the same guilt trip repeated every day, a relentless reminder that my decision was a betrayal. Mom didn't understand that what I had done wasn't about turning my back on my father. It was about protecting myself, my future, and my well-being. But the guilt kept coming, again and again. Every time I looked at Dad, I saw the strain on his face. He was so thin now, frail where he used to be strong. His once solid presence had been reduced to someone who depended on others for his survival. He looked at me with a kind of silent hurt in his eyes, as if wondering why I didn't want to help him, why I refused to be the daughter he always believed I would be. There were days when I would second-guess my decision. Wouldn't it be easier to just give him the kidney? Wouldn't it feel better to see his health restored? To fix what felt broken between us? My mind became a battlefield, torn between the logical voice telling me to protect myself and the emotional pull of family responsibility. Could I live with myself if something happened to Dad because of my refusal? Or was I right to trust my instincts and refuse the sacrifice? The internal struggle. To make sense of it all, I reached out to others for advice. I knew the only way to ease the doubt was to talk to someone who wasn't involved in the situation, someone who wouldn't be swayed by family loyalty or guilt. I called Sarah, my best friend, hoping she would offer me some clarity. "Sarah, I don't know what to do," I admitted on the phone, my voice cracking with the weight of everything. I said no. But now I don't know if I made the right choice. Everyone is telling me that I'm being selfish, but it's my body, right? It's my choice? "Of course it's your choice," she responded firmly. "You're not being selfish. You have to look at this from your own perspective. It's not about punishing your dad. It's about protecting your health, your future. If you give him your kidney, what happens to you? What if something goes wrong? You can't sacrifice your life just because someone says you should." Her words made sense. Sarah had always been the voice of reason, the one who grounded me in tough situations. But even after hearing her reassure me, I still couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. It wasn't just about my decision. It was about how it affected everyone else. Was I willing to risk my relationship with Dad and Mom? Was I willing to walk away from the guilt that would forever follow me? I hung up the phone feeling more confused than before. The decision seemed clear, but the emotional fallout was not. I wasn't just struggling with the physical implications. I was struggling with the emotional aftermath of breaking a bond I thought was unbreakable. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that family wasn't just about blood. It was about the responsibilities and expectations that come with it. And right now, those expectations felt suffocating. The conversations with family. Eventually, I knew I had to face Dad directly. It was the only way to move forward, to either rebuild or accept the irreversible distance my decision had created. So one evening I sat with him on the couch. Mom had been out and we were alone. Dad didn't look at me immediately. Instead, he sat with his hands folded in his lap, a weary look on his face. "I know what you said," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "but I need you to understand something. I'm not asking for your kidney just for me. I'm asking for you too, for the family. I thought we were close enough that you wouldn't hesitate." His words hit me like a slap, but they weren't what hurt most. What hurt most was his tone. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was disappointing. The kind of disappointment that makes you feel smaller than you ever thought possible. And I hated myself for it. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I wish I could do it. I do. But I can't risk my future. I can't." I saw his face harden slightly, but he didn't argue. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Dad spoke. "I don't understand, but I won't force you. Just know that it hurts." And with that, the conversation was over. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't beg. But his heartache was more than I could bear. The guilt and its toll. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever lived. Mom became more distant. The unspoken words between us grew louder with each passing day. I knew Dad wasn't talking to anyone about it, but the way he withdrew, the way he stopped looking at me the same way, was enough to make me question everything. Did I make the right decision? Was I betraying him? Was the risk to my own health enough to justify the cost of breaking my father's heart? But even then, deep down, I knew I had made the only choice I could live with. The silence between us grew louder. Dad's health continued to worsen, and while I tried to support him in other ways, the emotional distance between us was growing harder to ignore. The guilt I felt was unrelenting, but I knew I had to protect myself. As I sat in my room one night, I finally allowed myself to truly reflect. I couldn't erase the guilt, but I could accept that this was my decision to make. It didn't make me a bad person. It just made me someone who needed to take control of their own life. The moment of refusal came swiftly, and in hindsight, I realized it wasn't as dramatic as I thought it would be. It wasn't some grand confrontation with yelling and crying. It wasn't a fight that would end with both sides screaming their truths. It was quieter than that. More devastating. A simple no, spoken with a quiet, firm voice, was enough to unravel everything. That night, as I sat across from Dad and Mom, the words felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. I could feel the room closing in around me, the pressure suffocating me. Their eyes were on me. Mom's filled with desperation. Dad's filled with something else, something I wasn't sure I could handle. Disappointment. "I can't do it," I said. My voice trembled despite my best efforts to remain calm. "I can't give you my kidney." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom blinked as though my refusal had physically struck her. Her face contorted briefly with hurt, and then she blinked away the tears threatening to spill. But it wasn't her tears that hurt most. It was the look on Dad's face, a mixture of hurt, anger, and disbelief. It was as though I had torn down something irreplaceable, and in that moment, I realized how much my decision would cost me. I knew, even then, that things between us would never be the same. "I can't believe this," Dad said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "You're my daughter. You're all I have left. How could you say no to me?" His words hung in the air, and I felt my heart break with every syllable. I wanted to tell him that I was scared, that I couldn't risk my own health for him. I was scared of what it would mean for me if I gave him a piece of my body. But I didn't say it. I couldn't. How do you explain to someone that you can't help them because you're too afraid of what it might cost you? How do you explain to the person you love that you need to protect yourself from the very love they are offering you? "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I just can't." The words barely left my lips before Mom's voice cracked through the silence. "You're being selfish. You're hurting him, hurting all of us. He's your father. You have to help." She stepped back, almost as if she were physically distancing herself from me. The hurt in her eyes was palpable, a reflection of the pain that had suddenly become an uninvited guest in our home. I could feel the weight of her disappointment, like an anchor around my chest, dragging me into the depths of guilt and shame. But despite the ache in my chest, despite the guilt that was gnawing away at me, I couldn't take the words back. The decision had been made. The silence that followed was the hardest part. It wasn't angry shouting. It wasn't words exchanged in frustration. It was the silence of an emotional rift, the kind that slowly pulls you apart, one quiet moment at a time. The shifting dynamics. After that night, things were never the same. The house, once filled with the noise of family life, became strangely quiet. There was no more laughter around the dinner table, no casual conversations about our days. Every word that was spoken felt like it carried weight, like it was being measured against the decision I had made. Mom and I barely spoke. Every time she looked at me, I could see the hurt in her eyes, and I knew it was my fault. But I couldn't bring myself to apologize. Not because I didn't feel sorry for her pain, but because I needed to hold on to my decision. I needed to stand by it, even if it meant living with the consequences. Dad, on the other hand, withdrew completely. At first, I thought it was just his way of coping. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized how deeply my refusal had cut him. He no longer engaged with me the way he used to. The warmth that had always been present in his gaze was gone, replaced with a quiet sorrow that I could feel even when we didn't speak. I tried to reach out to him. I tried to make up for what I had done by taking on more responsibilities around the house, by doing things for Mom, by offering my support in ways I thought would show them how much I loved them. But nothing seemed to make a difference. The distance between us kept growing until I felt like a stranger in my own family. The isolation was the worst part. It wasn't just that I was avoiding my family. They were avoiding me. Dad and Mom would have conversations, but they would stop when I entered the room. They'd talk in hushed tones, looking at me with the kind of quiet judgment that felt like a dagger to the heart. They were making me the outsider, and I had no way to make it right. living with the decision. I wish I could say that the decision became easier with time, but it didn't. As the weeks stretched on, I began to question whether I had made the right choice. I'd catch myself in quiet moments, staring at my reflection in the mirror, wondering if I had been too selfish. Was I wrong? Was family loyalty more important than my own well-being? Had I made a mistake that I would have to live with forever? I tried to find solace in the idea that I had done what was right for me. Sarah had reminded me time and again that my health was my responsibility, that my future couldn't be sacrificed for the sake of someone else's. But in those quiet moments of doubt, when I was alone with my thoughts, the guilt would rise again, drowning out the logic. I would think about Dad's face, the hurt in his eyes, and I would wonder if I had made a mistake. Still, I held firm. I knew that I couldn't undo what had been done. I couldn't take back the refusal. And in some ways, that gave me a strange sense of peace. I had made the decision, and now I had to live with it. I had to accept that there would be consequences. That's what happens when you make choices that change the course of your life. But even though the emotional toll was heavy, I also began to find a sense of independence in the decision. For the first time, I had made a choice that was solely mine. I had chosen my future over my family's demands. And while that came with a price, it also gave me the strength to stand up for myself in a way I never had before. The long-term impact. As Dad's health continued to decline, I couldn't ignore the strain it placed on our family. Mom began making regular trips to the hospital with him, and I saw her struggle to keep up with everything. The emotional weight of watching her husband suffer was something I could feel, even from a distance. She was angry with me, but her anger wasn't just about my decision. It was about her own fear, her own helplessness in the face of her husband's illness. Over time, I found myself looking for ways to support Mom. I couldn't change the past, but I could try to help in other ways. I took on more responsibilities around the house and tried to be there for Dad as much as I could. But it never felt like enough. I could feel the cracks in our relationship, the tension that grew each time I entered a room where Mom and Dad were. I had become a reminder of what I had refused to do, of the decision that had driven a wedge between us. Time has a way of softening the sharp edges of regret, but some wounds never fully heal. Dad's condition worsened, and despite my attempts to rebuild the bridges between us, the distance I had created with my refusal never fully disappeared. Our once close-knit family was now a fragile shell of what it used to be. I had thought that time would heal all things, but time only brought more questions. Questions about what family really meant, what loyalty truly was, and how far you should go to protect yourself. The moments of silence became unbearable. Mom and I barely spoke anymore, and when we did, the words were heavy with unspoken hurt. Dad had become a shadow of the man he once was. The once strong, reliable figure now seemed frail, both physically and emotionally. Watching him slowly deteriorate, knowing that I had been the one to refuse his life-saving kidney, was a burden I could barely carry. But I had made my choice, and there was no turning back. As I sat in the hospital room with Mom, watching Dad struggle to breathe, I couldn't escape the guilt. His labored breaths, the way he stared blankly at the ceiling, seemed like a constant reminder of my decision. I had told myself I had to protect my future, but now, in the sterile quiet of the hospital room, I wasn't sure what that future looked like anymore. Mom's silence had grown louder over the weeks. She had stopped asking for my help, stopped looking at me the way she used to. Her eyes now held a strange emptiness, one that I couldn't fill, no matter how hard I tried. The reality of what I had done was sinking in deeper. I hadn't just refused a kidney. I had refused a part of the family, a part of myself. In that moment, I realized that family didn't just demand love and sacrifice. It demanded understanding. It demanded compromise. And by refusing to give Dad the kidney, I had failed them both. I had failed the family. Living with the decision. It wasn't just the guilt that I had to live with. It was the quiet resentment that had built up in me. Every glance, every word from Mom, every word from Dad, felt like an accusation. I had expected the judgment to be harsh, but I hadn't anticipated the long-lasting silence that followed. Mom and I had always been close. She had been my best friend, the person I turned to for everything. But now, that bond felt like it had been severed, and I wasn't sure how to fix it. I tried. I really did. I spent hours cooking meals for Mom and Dad, hoping that my actions would speak louder than my words. But it wasn't enough. No matter how many times I said sorry, no matter how many times I tried to make things right, it never felt like it was enough. The guilt was suffocating, but so was the feeling of being misunderstood. I had made a decision that was best for me, yet no one seemed to understand that. Dad wasn't getting better, and I couldn't bear watching him fade further. It felt like an emotional tug of war. I wanted to help. I wanted to be the daughter they expected me to be, but I couldn't give them what they asked for. Not then, not ever. I had chosen to protect myself, but in doing so, I had lost pieces of myself. The person I was before this decision, before I refused the kidney, felt like someone I didn't even recognize anymore. I had been a part of this family, but now I was on the outside, looking in. The long-term impact weeks turned into months. Dad's health continued to decline, but the effects of his illness were no longer just physical. The emotional distance in our home grew wider, and the pain of my decision never really went away. Mom and I spoke less and less. There were no more heartfelt conversations about my day, no more laughs around the dinner table. It was as if the air between us had become thick with regret and anger, and I couldn't breathe. I tried to reconcile with her. I called, I texted, I sent flowers, and I did everything I thought might show her that I hadn't stopped loving her, that I hadn't stopped caring about Dad. But the emotional wall that had formed between us was almost insurmountable. One day, after months of silence, Mom finally spoke to me. She didn't yell, didn't cry. She simply said, "You made your choice, but I don't think you understand how much it hurt." Her words pierced through me like a knife. I had thought that time would heal the rift, that eventually Mom would forgive me, but she was right. I didn't understand. I didn't understand the pain of watching a loved one suffer, the helplessness that comes with seeing someone you love slowly fade away. I didn't understand how much my refusal had hurt her, and I didn't understand how much it had broken the bond we once shared. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I wish I could take it back." But I couldn't. The words felt hollow, empty. They didn't undo the damage I had caused. They didn't fix the rift between us. But it was all I had. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence between us said everything. Redefining family and future. After months of guilt, self-doubt, and the slow destruction of my relationship with Mom and Dad, I finally came to a difficult realization. I had to live with my decision. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't undo the pain I had caused. But I could choose to move forward, to redefine what family meant to me, and to find peace with the boundaries I had set for myself. For the first time in my life, I realized that protecting myself wasn't selfish. It wasn't wrong. I had made a choice that was best for me, and while the aftermath was painful, it was mine to bear. I couldn't control the anger or disappointment from my family. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could learn to live with it, to move forward. Dad passed away quietly a few months later. I wasn't there when it happened. Mom had been by his side, but by that point, I had already taken a step back. I had learned to navigate my own feelings of guilt and regret, but I was no longer willing to let the weight of their expectations define me. I remember sitting alone in my apartment, staring out at the city skyline, thinking about how much had changed. I had lost pieces of my family, but I had gained something new, a sense of autonomy, a deeper understanding of what it meant to care for myself. In the end, I don't regret my decision. I still carry the weight of the consequences, but I know that I made the right choice for me. It's been a long road to understanding, to accepting that boundaries, no matter how difficult, are necessary. I had to learn that sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that are right for you, even when the rest of the world disagrees. So, where do you draw the line when family demands the ultimate sacrifice? Was my refusal selfish or self-preserving? The guilt never left, but neither did my conviction. This decision reshaped everything. If you've ever faced an impossible choice, let me know in the comments. Was your family's demand worth the sacrifice? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to VowsBurn for more gripping stories about love, betrayal, and the tough decisions we all face. Join the conversation, and let's dive deeper into the stories that make us question everything.